Hello guys, welcome back to Twitter Techie. So today we are going to discuss about the topic that we left in the previous video, that is promise and async and await. So before moving to the promise, first we need to understand what is synchronous code and what is asynchronous code in JavaScript. So I have one snippet code over here, and if you see, this is a synchronous code. Why we say synchronous code? Because what we expect from the JavaScript engine, that it will execute the methods and the lines line by line. So if you see, we have defined a function over here which contains one console, and then we are calling method 2, and then we are printing console again. So if you call this method 1, so it will go to this method 1, and then it will execute this method console.log. Then it will go to the method 2, and inside the method 2 it will execute this console.log again, and then it will come back to this line 5, it will execute this console. So this is happening line by line. So let's execute this code first and let's see what is the output. And that's what I expected. Method 1 before method 2, this line gets executed, method 2 gets called, so it goes to line 9, so method 2 called, and then again it goes back to the previous method and executes method 1 after method 2. That's what we expect, right? To execute line by line. Now what is asynchronous code? So I have another snippet code over here. Let's comment this out and let's uncomment this part. Now if you see, we are calling method 1, so it will execute this console log, then it will call method 2, right? So it will execute this method 2 called. Then we have a set timeout. So whatever we have written inside the set timeout, it will execute whatever the timer we have provided to that parameter, right? So we have provided 2000 milliseconds. So it will, so whatever we have written inside this function, that will execute after 2000 milliseconds, that is 2 seconds. After this execution, it will go to this line 18 and it will execute method 1 after method 2. So let's execute this part of code. Let's rerun it. Okay, let's save it first. Now if you see, method 1 before method 1 is printing, then method 2 gets called and it's printing method 2 called, and then method 1 after method 2 is printing. So this line is printing at the end, but this line is printing before this line. Why? Because this line will execute after 2 seconds. So this is part of asynchronous code. So why do we need promise? So promise is a kind of object in JavaScript that handles the asynchronous code. So how does it handle? So let's say, first of all, we need to understand why do we need promise. So let's say we call an API and we don't want to wait for the response to execute further code, right? In that case, what we need, like other codes should execute, we should not block the other code to execute. And once we get the response, based on the response, whatever we need to perform the activity, we should do. So that's where promise comes. So let's understand what is promise. So let's create a promise first. So how do we create? So we use a new keyword and we have a constructor promise, and it accepts callback function, you can say. That accepts two parameters. First parameter is resolve and second parameter is reject. And inside this, we can perform whether it is successful or unsuccessful. So when we call resolve, it means this promise is successful. So let's say we call resolve 1. Now, so this is how we create a promise. Now to how to handle the promise is different thing. So now we have created the promise. To handle the promise, we have one method then. Inside this, there will be a function as a parameter, and it accepts the response that we return from resolve 1. And we'll print log. So let's comment this part. And we'll print this response. Save it. So one is printing, right? Now what if we call reject? Let's call it value 2. Save it. So to handle the resolve, we use then. To handle the reject, we use catch. Again, it accepts function. Let's say this is error. And inside this, in the value error. Let's comment this out. So 2 is printing, right? So to handle the error, we need to implement catch block, and to handle the successful call for resolve, we need to use then method. So now what will happen when we call both? So let's see. Save it and comment this part as well. So now if you see, we got 1 and it's executing this part, it's not executing this part. Why is it so? So when you call resolve, the further line of code will be ignored by the JavaScript. So even if you write console.log, it will execute. So let's see. It's printing. But if you try to call or reject after resolve, then it will not work. So now let's understand. Let's first define all these using the array function, so it will be cleaner code. Let's comment this out, how we can write it. This goes to new promise, and here we'll use the array function. Use resolve, comma reject. All this with 1, like this we can use it, and similarly, and then we can use array function like response console.log response. See, yeah, 1 is printing, right? Now then also accepts second parameter. So if you don't want to use catch block, right, you can use second parameter as a catch block for handling the error. So there are 2 ways to handle the error. Console.log let's print error. Okay, so if we either we can write like this, or we can write like dot catch. Both are same. So let's see. 1 is printing. So okay, here we are calling resolve. So let's try with reject. Let's pass some string in this case. Save it. Reject not defined. Okay. For mistake. Save it. So error is printing. So both are the correct way to handle the error. Either pass as a second parameter. Now if you only want to handle the error, so you can write like this. Promise.catch. Let's copy this. This will also work. Or you can write like null as the first parameter because you don't want to handle the response. Save it. What it is saying, okay, this should be then, because yeah, so error. So let's comment these 2 parts first. On this one, yeah, this part as well. You can handle the catch, the error part, using the second parameter of then or using the catch block. Okay. Now we have, so going forward, we'll use the add function only. So now how do we have, so this is straightforward with resolve and reject. There is no asynchronous part over here, right? So now let's create a asynchronous part. So let's do one thing. Let's copy this. What I will do, I will resolve it or success, but I will call this method inside the set timeout. I will do set timeout inside this function. I will call this resolve success and put the timer of 200 millisecond, that is 2 seconds. Now we'll call this dot then. Inside this we'll get response. We'll print the value response. Okay. So comment these two first. What is saying? Promise has already been declared. Okay. Comment this out as well. So we'll wait for 2 seconds. So see, now we are getting the response and it's handling the callback as well. So after 2 seconds, we resolve this value and we get success. After 2 seconds, let's reject the value. So what will happen? It will go to catch and will handle. So if you don't write catch and if you reject, then it gives you error like you're not handling the catch part if you get error. Console.log print error. Let's change this string to error. Save it and let's see the value after 2 seconds. So we got the value error. So this is how we handle. Now this snippet of code, right? There's an alternative way to write it down as well using arrow function. So what I'll do here, we are using arrow function. So I'll convert this like this because we have only one line of code. So you can remove the curly braces as well, like this. This should also work. Let's see. Yeah, we got it. Now there is another way that we can pass this parameter reject and the error string. Like let's comment this out as well. So we can pass this reject callback and we can pass as third parameter as a response. So here if we pass error, let's see. So sorry, this should be, this reject itself is a method, right? So we can pass as a callback, save it. So we got the error response. So as a third parameter, it will pass this object or a string as a parameter of this reject. So here we get this error as a string of what we are passing in the parameter. So this is how we handle promise. Now we have another block that is finally. Irrespective of what we get, whether it is rejected or whether it is accepted or we got the successful response, that finally block will execute. So how do we implement? We can write promise dot finally. Again, this accepts a callback function. So let's, this time we'll use console. So finally doesn't accept any parameter. So where you can use finally when you, irrespective of successful response or error, you can execute your code in this finally. So let's use this finally, and then we'll copy this part of code. Then So let's comment this part of code. Let's see the output. Finally, and then error is coming. So you can write finally at the end as well. It's not mandatory to add at the starting. So like this, you can add it over here as well. So let's see what will happen. First, let's execute the catch part and then the finally part. Okay. Now there are multiple static values, not the static values, static method provided by the promise object. So let's understand all those things. So I have a snippet code over here. So let's comment these out. Let's comment this. So what is happening here? We have created a promise, and this is a resolve part with 2000 milliseconds, and it returns promise one string. Promise 2 is straightforward, rejecting it without waiting for any milliseconds. And promise 3 is waiting for, let's change this value to 1 second, and so returning 1000 millisecond. Okay, now when we'll execute this, we are executing promise 1, promise 2, and promise 3 together using all method, right? All static method. Let's see what should be the output. So what happens with all static method? As soon as you get any reject from any of the promise, it will go to the catch. So here if you see, we are rejecting straightforward we do. So let's do something. Let's put timeout in this case as well. We reject it. After, let's say, 3000 milliseconds, and we'll set promise 2. Okay, so let's see the output. So here if you see, yeah, so it's not going to the then block, it's going to the catch block, because all promises are not successful. So what all does, checks all the promise. If any of the promise is rejected, it will go to the catch block. If all the promise is successful, then only it will go to the then block. So now let's resolve all the values. Let's say resolve it, and then let's see the output. Where did we change? Here we need to change it. Resolve. Let's see the output. See, now we are getting in the response all the 3 promises with the result in an array. Okay, this is how all work. So let's comment this part now. Let's understand another method, that is all settled. And comment this part. What all settled does, it waits for all the reject, all the response, all the resolve, or either it has to be all resolve or all reject. So if you see this part, right, it gets the result, and we are printing what we are getting in the result using for each in this array. So if you see, status is fulfilled, fulfilled, and fulfilled, right? So once all the promise gets resolved or rejected, then only it will execute then block. So now it always return a resolve promise. So even if we do reject over here, it will go to then block, and in the result you will get the status whether it is fulfilled or rejected. So save it. Let's wait for a moment. So now if you see, the status for promise 1 is fulfilled, for promise 2 is rejected, for promise 3 is fulfilled. So now if we reject all 3, even in that case it will go to then. So there is no catch block, because all settle will always return a resolved promise. Save it. Let's try. See, all rejected. So you'll get the status in this and you will get the reason. So that is the reason. So now if you see, let's undo it. In the reason, we are getting the error message, but in the value we are getting the response. So if you want to see the error, you need to use result.reason. If you want to see the successful value, you need to use result.value. So this is what we are doing. Okay. So now let's comment this out. See another method, that is any. So what any does, so there are three promises. So if any of the promises, as soon as it gets resolved, this then method will get called. So let's save it and see. So which promise gets resolved first? Promise 3, right? So that's why we got the result of promise 3. Okay. So it doesn't go to, so now let's see if we make it 4 seconds, and this time it will give you promise 1. Yeah, got promise 1. And if none of the result gives you the resolve value, then it will go to catch. This is how any works. Let's comment this. Now we have another, that is race method. So what it does, it checks for any resolve or any reject. As soon as we get any resolve method, or as soon as we get the error method, it will get called. So let's remove for now. Save it and we'll see. So we have promise 1, promise 2, promise 3. So this one gets resolved. So that's why it's going to this. Now let's change this value to 500 milliseconds. Now, as soon as, so we got this result, right? Reject in 3 seconds. So it will go to catch block only. Let's see. So these are the utility methods given by promise object. Now let's understand with the actual API call. So what I'll do, I will make let's use promise 1. Let's comment these all code. So let's actual API call. Let's use JSON placeholder. Let's get API call. So this fetch is an inbuilt method of browser that helps us to call in third-party API. So when we call this, it returns a promise. Okay. So this variable contains promise now. Now I will do promise dot then. I will use this. First we'll print this value and then see what we need to do next. Dot log response. Save it. Yes. Yeah. Save it and see the value. So here we get response, that is what are the status, whether it is successful or not, and all those things. So now if you see this, let's expand this. You see we have body, right? And body is the readable stream. So to get the JSON object, again we need to use a chain of the promise. Okay. So what do we need to do over here? We need to write, this is a method provided by the browser. So now again it is return a promise. So again we'll handle then, and then in this response we'll get the JSON object. console.log response. Let's save it and see the value. See, now we are getting the actual JSON object here. So now let me minimize this. Yeah. Now let's change some URL in this. Okay, let's do something to do. I change the URL. Save it. Now it's saying there is error, right? And we are not handling that error. So what do we need to do? Then first here what we'll do, all these things, remember, let's print this response again and we'll see what is the output. Save it. So here we get status 404, right? Okay is also false, not true. So what we can do to handle such kind of scenario, right? You can check if dot status equals to 200 as per your requirement, however you want to handle it. Then return this.json else error, and if you want to get the value, oh, we don't have anything in the status text, or based on the response code, the status code, you can return it. So in response, this is a generic response I'm returning. Okay, so then console.log, and here we'll use this response, and then dot catch, and here we'll handle the error. Console.log, and let's see the output. So here error response we are getting in this, so it's not going to this then block, right? So this is how we handle the actual API call. So now again let's change it to exact URL and see. So now we are getting the value. Based on the value, whatever you want to do in this then block, you can do it. I'm just printing out. So now if you see, they are chaining over here on then again. If you return a promise, then we need to use then, right? So it will be a clumsy code if you have multiple response, multiple resolve, or multiple promise to handle, right? So there's another cleaner way that you can do using async and await. So how we can write it? So this code I'm gonna write using async and await. Okay. So first we need to create a function. Say promise function, or let's use async. Give it a name async. Inside this, we'll call this fetch. Okay. I think await is another way to handle the promise. So this fetch returns a promise object. To handle it in front of that method call, we use await. Okay. And whatever it returns, that will be our response. Okay. The next line of code will only execute once promise gets settled. Log. So let's comment all these code and use the response. Now here we are using await, we are not using async. So whenever you use await inside a function, that function has to be prefixed with async, like this. Await won't work without async. So let's save it, and then we'll call this async function. Okay. Yeah. Save it, and we'll see. And also, what we'll do, we'll show you how it is working asynchronously. Async called. So we save it. So first async call, this console gets printed, then response is getting printed. So whatever you have written after await, that will execute. Once this fetch, the promise will get settled. Okay. Now here again the same thing we are getting, that header body. So in the response, again what we need to do, and result. First let's try to do with simple .json. That's what we did here as well, right? But here I'm not using await for now. Okay. Copy this and we'll see what will happen. See this, it's returning a promise. So again, this is a promise. So we need to again use the await keyword to handle the promise. Save it. Now we get the actual value in the result, right? This is how we handle it. Now if you want to return something from this async, right? So let's do one thing. So let's response value and see what is returning. Okay. So no matter what you are returning from this, the async function always return a promise. So let's console it, save it. See, value is returning as pending. So let's handle this promise and see response dot then, and we'll print the value console.log response. Even if you're not returning something, it's still returning a promise. So no matter what you are returning from this function, async function, it always return as a promise. So let's see the value. Okay, let's comment this out first. These two value. Yeah. So undefined, because we are not returning something from here. That's why in the response we are getting undefined. So let's, whatever result we get, right, we'll return it from here. Return result. Save it. So comment this console first. So now this response we are getting is a response over here. So this is how we use await and async with the actual API call. Okay. So now what will happen in case we have error? Let's remove something here and see. See, we are getting the blank object. So how do we handle those things? So what we can do, we can use try and catch block. Whatever functionality you have, write it down inside the catch block and inside the try block. And if you get some error, we'll go to catch block. And from here also, we can return it. Return error. And from here, what we'll do, return result. Okay, save it. So what's printing the value? The blank object. So now here again, the same thing we need to do. We need to check the status, if it is successful or not. If it is not successful, throw error. So let's do this. Just copy this part. So if response dot status this part inside this, else copy this part, error. Sorry, cost to 200. Save it. Now if you see, we are getting this error in response in this console over here. Okay, this is how we can use an alternative way to handle the promise using async and await. That's all from this video. So in the next video, we'll have some new topics. Till then, bye bye, take care, and please subscribe our channel to get the latest update on JavaScript or any other topic. Thank you.